Welcome to the target stream for Mint Press News. I'm your host, Robert Inlakesh. Thank you to everyone for joining us again today. Now, there's a lot to get into in today's live stream. We'll be looking at Lebanon, Israel's escalation, and then Hezbollah's blistering responses, focusing on what's happening on the ground in southern Lebanon, while also covering the escalation between Iran and the United States, because that, of course, is still on the edge of erupting into what will be the continuation of a regional war, which will implicate, again, Hezbollah, but perhaps even more regional actors this time. But before we begin this live stream, and all the work we do at Mint Press is supported by our members, so we call on you to join us for as little as $5 per month on Patreon. We were banned on PayPal and GoFundMe and had our fundraisers taken down and targeted by the Israel lobby and an Israeli OnlyFans model. So we need your support to keep Mint Press alive, so that we can continue exposing the stories that the corporate media refuses to touch. That being said, let's get right into today's topics. We'll start with what's going on currently, because there's, with the Iran escalation, because there is a lot that's constantly emerging, a lot that happened since we've been on the stream last time. One of them is that now, finally, put this up here, the UAE is being exposed by the corporate media for carrying out attacks on Iran directly. And so this is something, by the way, that we have covered at Mint Press News, that the United Arab Emirates has not been neutral, that the UAE has been involved directly at multiple stages of this war, including through using its drone technology, its integrated air defense to aid the Israelis in the war. But now the Wall Street Journal is admitting that role, or exposing that role, I guess. They're calling it as an exclusive. This was something that Iran had already revealed to be the case, and was pretty evident. And we've seen the escalation in terms of the rhetoric as well of the UAE, and the way that it's been behaving. You'll see that the likes of Qatar have reached out multiple times to the Iranians, have held multiple phone calls with their Iranian counterparts, while Saudi Arabia has even done the same. Oman has been more so on the side. It's had an actual neutral position, but it's been more so on Iran's side in many ways. And for that, it hasn't come under direct Iranian attack, but the United Arab Emirates has gone in the complete opposite direction. Bahrain and Kuwait appear to be more firmly in the Zionist camp now as well. But I wanted to note that, and also bring up what Donald Trump has been saying. He's been signaling that the war could restart at any time. This is one of his comments today. So he is openly, I suppose, threatening, saying that there's a large group of generals that are waiting on him to discuss Iran, and he still somehow doesn't understand. Hearing that, unfortunately, the audio is not working on this one here. But basically what he was saying in his usual goofy way was that, yeah, Iran, the strikes could be on the table, and he's signaling that there could be an escalation. Always this, still with Elon Musk's X, using the Pahlavi era Iranian flag, even though that's not the flag of Iran, but they still put that on there. It's about as ridiculous as Donald Trump claiming that 36,000 Iranian protesters were killed, or 42,000 now, he says. And he can't even seem to come up with a good answer as to what duration of time these protesters, these tens of thousands of protesters in this historic crime, were killed, apparently. But that's just Donald Trump and his theatrics. One thing that I think that we should note, and I wanted to pull this up here, is that obviously we've talked on this live stream before about the possibility that the United States might launch some sort of attack on these islands in the Persian Gulf, Qassim Island. There was a trade of fire, of course, in this region. The United States attempted to bring its warships through the Strait of Hormuz. Now, there's conflicting reports, and Iran has its own claims about precisely what had happened in this exchange. But there does appear to have been photographic evidence that perhaps Iran did strike a U.S. warship. There is no confirmation of that right now, but it does appear that that could have been the case. And the United Arab Emirates, again, opened fire recently on Iran too, according to Iranian media reports. And so Iran then responded, and they targeted Dubai, and before that, Fujairah port. But if the U.S. is seeking to take these islands, I've said that Abu Musa and these two islands here, Greater and Lesser Tumb, could be targets. People have said Qassim Island, that might be a little bit more risky. And so would Kharg Island, which is nowhere near, again, the Strait of Hormuz. It's up here. It's the Strait of Hormuz. I don't know how it would have any impact on opening the Strait of Hormuz. But if they do take these islands, it would be, or try to take them, it would be simply symbolic, because that's just, you don't stop Iran from firing missiles and drones. And of course, that doesn't interfere with the mines by taking islands. It's a symbolic move, which will be costly in terms of the amount of casualties that's going to bring about to U.S. troops. But another possibility is that they could use the U.S., they could use Turkmenistan as a launching pad, perhaps targeting Mashhad and other areas for these special forces raids. That's on the table. Again, this is something that we have covered at Mint Press. So if you go to our website, there's an article about that where I went into a little bit more detail about why that could take place and what indications there are that the United States could look about going that route. That being said, now we're going to move on to the main topic of today, and that is the Lebanon front, because things have been dramatically escalating in Lebanon. And Hezbollah is right now up to committing over 20 retaliatory operations against Israeli forces who are stationed in southern Lebanon and are attacking civilian sites, are destroying buildings constantly inside of the country. I'm just going to pull this up here. And the Israelis decided that they would escalate by going after Beirut, which was supposed to be, by the way, part of a ceasefire agreement, which was struck between the United States and Iran, really, to stop the Israelis from attacking and to declare a ceasefire. And there's been no ceasefire. Israel, immediately when this temporary ceasefire was declared, decided that within an hour it would commit 10 violations of the ceasefire agreement. It wanted to go back to the situation in February of this year and before that for 15 months, where Israel got to attack at will inside of Lebanon, and Hezbollah wouldn't do anything in return. And it could pressure the Lebanese government, which is a puppet regime in the hands of the United States, to go after Hezbollah and to create a civil war situation in the country. But Hezbollah has chosen to go about things in a different way and resist. And so for every violation and for the more severe violations, Hezbollah is choosing to target Israeli forces and has discovered the cheat code for defeating the Israeli military in the south of the country, overcoming the technological advantages of the Israelis and turning their tactics, which are very risk adverse, against them. So the Israelis are cowards, and they like to hide inside of their armored personnel carriers and their tanks and D9 bulldozers. And they even send out, vehicles which are not manned by actual soldiers to sort of test the waters. And if they get targeted, they won't come into an area. This is how the Israelis operate. And this is how they have operated. And this means that they stay inside of their tanks, stay inside of their vehicles until they get to an area. And then they, of course, set up base in a civilian area, claim to have captured it, and they claim to have fought battles. They never fight actual battles on the ground. They rarely ever engage the enemy. And their main mission is just to blow up civilian infrastructure. So they'll target churches and they'll bring in, their equipment and their bulldozers to destroy, for instance, a Christian school and a monastery. And while they're there, their soldiers will pull out the underwear of women, Lebanese women, or in the case of Gaza, the same thing, Gazan women's underwear, and they'll wear it and they'll mock them and they'll sniff their underwear, and they'll take videos of this and then upload this on the internet thinking that this is funny. And they'll do other things like mock statues of the Virgin Mary and Jesus. And this is just the way that they behave. But everything is turning back on them. These tanks are now essentially coffins on wheels, because Hezbollah has managed to mass produce FPV drones with these fiber optic cables and smash them into tanks from miles and miles away, over 10 kilometers away at the least. And I think the range of these FPV drones can go up to 30 kilometers. And they cost about $50, and they take out multi-million-dollar equipment, their tanks, their armored personnel carriers. And now they actually have to have infantry beside their tanks, something which they wouldn't do before in Gaza because they're too scared. Now they have to do that because if they just stay in the tanks, they're sitting ducks. So at least when they get out and they're set up in an area, they actually have some people watching now. But it's not going too well for them, because their tactics are tactics of cowards that depend entirely on their technology in order to do anything. They're not capable of doing anything on the ground without their technology. And that's very obvious because they don't have an answer to the drones that Hezbollah are deploying against them. And then what they decided to do is go further with violating the temporary so-called ceasefire and attack Beirut. Now, the Jerusalem Post claims that the IDF confirms killing the Radwan force commander. So the Radwan forces are like the special forces units of Hezbollah. And this is something that the Israelis do. They believe that assassinating people and pulling off sneaky, conniving attacks like pager attacks, where you go and you put explosive devices in pagers and indiscriminately target the civilian population as well, that these sort of things, and you implement the Dahia doctrine, so you blow up a bunch of civilians, or you do something like kill 300 civilians within the span of 10 minutes in Beirut, that this is victory. This is something that is an achievement for them. And the reality is, I don't believe that Hezbollah has actually confirmed the killing of the Radwan forces commander. But this is a replacement, because they did the same in 2024 and it didn't work. They killed the former Secretary General of Hezbollah, Sayyid Hassan Nasrallah, and again, it didn't work. So everything they do, all of these assassinations and blowing up buildings and killing lots of civilians, it doesn't work. It doesn't work. This is a failing strategy, and they refuse to acknowledge that it's a failing strategy. So they just continue to do more of what they've been doing, which is killing civilians. And I think the audio for some reason is not working on this, but I was going to pull up this clip because it's pretty interesting. This is Netanyahu in his interview with 60 Minutes. And basically what he's saying here is, well, they hate us because they're jealous of us. The reason, because he's asked a question about why the Congress is not all pro-Israel anymore, why some of them have their own opinions and are against the Israelis, or are not automatically supporting everything Israel does. Like, somehow that's a problem. And his comment on it is, well, people are jealous of us because we're so successful and great, which is sort of like the hate us because they ain't. That comedian, I forget his name, that pro-Israel comedian that he said at the start of the Gaza genocide, he started rambling on like that. It couldn't be anything to do with the fact that you've been committing a genocide. Nothing to do with that. It's not to do with the fact that tens of thousands of children have been murdered on live streams, and there's just a constant feed of dead children for year after year after year. And you're attacking holy sites, you're attacking mosques, you're attacking churches, you're attacking all of your neighbors. No, it's just because people are jealous of how successful Israel is, which is, of course, quite comical. And I wanted to pull this up as well before we get into some of the Hezbollah videos that have been released. And there's an enormous amount of them to look at and sort of analyze. This was what the Israelis were saying for 15 months when Hezbollah was not firing back at them. And this is what they believed they had achieved. So Israel Katz, when he came into his position that he holds currently, he said, this is the headline, Israel's new defense minister said Hezbollah is defeated. That's what they claimed. Hezbollah has been defeated. It's no more. And Netanyahu would go on afterwards to claim that, we might have to do something to finish the job, but Hezbollah is done. And here's, this was 2024, so everyone is aware. So November 11, 2024, Hezbollah is defeated, according to the Israeli leadership. So here we go. We're going to have to translate this here. This is the Israeli media just yesterday. The north is under fire. It doesn't stop for a moment. The farmers, tourists, and businesses that remain in the area. Basically, they're whining about the reality that has been created when it's Israel that chose to go and invade southern Lebanon. And the Israeli media cannot let up on it. They just believe that they should be able to attack Lebanon, destroy entire villages, and mass murder a civilian population. And how dare they still be there? We must be able to do something about it. But they can't. And this is the problem that they have right now, is that they have absolutely no solution whatsoever to their predicament in southern Lebanon. So that brings us to what's been happening recently. And there's a lot that's been going on. So I had to put together a few of these videos here because Hezbollah has been releasing so many clips of its operations, specifically those using the FPV drones, which again, they mass produce. I think it's about $50 per drone that they can produce, and that's how low the cost is. And you can't trace the materials that are being used for it. It's just so simple to put together. And then these drones that are extremely simplistic, there's no answer to them. All of this, the hundreds of millions of dollars they're constantly investing in this technology and that technology and all the rest, they can't detect these drones, they can't shoot these drones down, and they can't jam them. So everything is completely obsolete, all of their technology. So let's get into a few of these. This right here is a series of videos. And as we always do before I play these, this is not an endorsement. This is a disclaimer that it's not an endorsement of this material. This is for the viewer's personal information and for the sake of news and analysis. So let's get into the first clip that I compiled here together of attacks on Israeli troops and troop gatherings. One thing I just want to note here is you're seeing this, that the Israeli soldier here fleeing the tank, because at the last moment he realizes, and when this drone hits the tank, there's a good chance that, I don't know how many soldiers were inside that tank. I'll just pause this for a second. But that could have been a tank kill hit, and he would have been incinerated inside of that tank, so he had to flee. But just taking note of where they place these military positions, they go on as high as possible on top of these hills, and they sort of occupy the hilltops. And then that's what they've done. So they're constantly monitoring everything around them. And yet still, not until the last second did they know that that drone was incoming, and a soldier quickly got out of his tank. And it's unclear whether there were any other soldiers that were still inside of the tank. But if they were, then I don't think that was a very good day for them, to say the least. Let's continue to play this here. One thing that's clear when we're looking at this, and this clip now that you're seeing is from northern occupied Palestine. So this is across the border, is that the drone operators are taking their time to choose their targets. They know what they want to hit, and they're getting high value targets often. These attacks specifically that you're looking at are targeting the troops, and they're doing this with purpose. But you can see that they can fly these drones over the border. They're not detected, and the Israelis are caught almost quite literally with their pants down. And there's little to nothing that they can even do about this. And so these sort of, as well, the fact that we can see this, because Israeli military censorship prevents this sort of content from being released. You know, the Israelis have footage of a lot of this themselves, but they don't release it purposefully. But now Hezbollah is using these drones. They're able to show us everything that they're doing. So we can watch and we can get confirmation of what has actually been hit. And the Israelis are struggling to hide what is happening. And so this puts an enormous amount of pressure. Like, these videos being released is a way of getting around Israel's military censorship. Because we see, like, this is what happened. This is, again, another attack in northern occupied Palestine on an Israeli military position. And look, the Israeli soldiers have to quickly scurry into a building in order to avoid being hit by the incoming drone at the last second. They don't know immediately that they can't see this coming in advance. So they're at all times, even on the other side of the border, or it's not really a border, there's sort of a demarcation line, because Israel hasn't declared its borders because it seeks to expand them. But they're incapable of dealing with this threat, even in their own military positions on the other side of the, I guess we'll call it a border for this, for the sake of this live stream. And here again is another attack in southern Lebanon, directly targeting Israeli soldiers. And this is, again, proof of what is happening on the ground. And Hezbollah is carrying out more than 20 of these operations every day. I think Israel has admitted already today so far that there have been, I think, 16 casualties so far today amongst its soldiers. And in total, in the 2 weeks since the ceasefire was declared, there's been about 218 Israeli soldiers that have been Israeli soldier casualties. And they admit the deaths of 18 of them, and they say the rest are injured. 200 number is a big round number, so it's probably actually more. Well, it's definitely more than that. But this is during the ceasefire time, low intensity, and they're losing lots of soldiers. And even if they're not losing them and they're just being injured, every single day there are these medevac helicopters which are just going in and out of southern Lebanon and transporting these soldiers to the hospitals, and they're just filling up the hospitals with these injured soldiers. And that has a psychological impact. The soldiers are so desperate that what they're doing is they're making these makeshift nets to try and catch the drones. And apparently, within the last 24 hours, an Israeli helicopter got caught in one of these nets, apparently. And they say they managed to avoid it crashing, but it almost caused another catastrophe for them because, again, they have no answers. And their only mission in southern Lebanon is to destroy civilian areas. That's what they're doing. They're destroying civilian areas. They're blowing up homes. They're using civilian contractors to come in and help them like they did in Gaza. Simply just bulldozing people's homes, dynamiting them. And they do have fun doing this. And while they're doing it, they mock the Christian faith. They go and, again, wear women's underwear out of their underwear drawers and dance around in it. That's the sort of activities that the Israeli soldiers are up to. Meanwhile, Hezbollah, another compilation here. This is what they've been up to. So while the Israelis are, of course, set up in Lebanese villages, and they are demolishing people's homes and going through the underwear drawers of these women who have been displaced or maybe even killed, we don't know. While the Israelis are doing that, Hezbollah is sending them drones. So very likely there might not have been in this vehicle. This looks like a command vehicle here. So the technology that would have been lost on that would have been quite costly. This village that you're looking at, by the way, it's important to note, this is actually a Maronite Christian village, to my understanding, in the Bint Jbeil district. So these claims, again, that Israel doesn't target the Christians, doesn't attack Christians is bogus. This is them operating in Christian areas, and Hezbollah is sending these drones. Now, something you notice is that Hezbollah are attacking these weak points, right? They'll attack the door, they'll attack the tops of tanks, for instance. And we're seeing when there are cases where Hezbollah uses 2 drones to film their attacks, that we're seeing that there are a lot of tank kill hits that are happening. And these drone operators, and this indicates that the nature of these attacks, again, in the same village here, this is another attack in the same village. What it indicates is that the drone operators are actually becoming more experienced. They're getting better at what they're doing because we see that they're more precise than they were previously from all of these videos coming out. That indicates that Israel is not succeeding at targeting these teams, that it doesn't know where they are, and is not, even if it kills some of them, it's not getting a lot of them at the very least. So again, that's another attack on a tank. That looks like that tank is actually perhaps mobile. And that's something to note here, is that these drones, when they attack these Israeli soldiers, the injuries that they're sustaining, even if we are to believe the Israeli death toll statistics precisely. It's another one in Biada here. Even if we're to believe their death toll statistics, the amount of injuries is a burden on the Israeli society. And it's something that it's a form of psychological warfare, because the rest of the Israeli soldiers are looking at this and it's a citizens' army. So here again, another, if you look, it's a top attack. And the tops of these tanks appear to be pretty weak in a lot of cases. Here again is another angle, so we can see the drone impacting the tank. So the video does cut off. We don't see like a secondary explosion, I don't believe. But at the same time, these are tanks that are multi-million-dollar Merkava tanks that are being taken out by drones that cost $50. And the highest, in the cases of the highest estimates, around $300 a drone, but it's very unlikely that it costs even that much. So we can just watch this right here. And of course, there's a variety of different kinds of attacks that are taking place now as well. But what we are seeing is that the Israelis are not having a good time. Something else I wanted to pull up here was that Hezbollah managed, and they released a video again confirming it, that they hit, and the Israeli side admits that this was a great catastrophe, and they lost an Iron Dome air defense platform. They hit the Iron Dome directly here. I'll just play the video of it. So they managed to target this Iron Dome launcher directly with an FPV drone. And again, like, they weren't able to even fire at this drone. They didn't know it was coming. It was so low. It was using the terrain. They have no solution for the FPV drones at all. And we've heard talk that they tried to use Ukrainian advisors, and that didn't work. And now they're just, trying to shoot at them. But if you see these videos and that Hezbollah are releasing, there's really no evidence. I rarely see. It looks like the Israelis are just running away. It doesn't look like they're actually trying to shoot down the drones. It looks like in most cases they're just fleeing, and they're trying to get away from the incoming drones. They're running for their life. They're not effectively bringing them down. And if they were, we would expect to see some footage of that. But again, we don't see any footage of it. And the Israelis, they love to claim about their air defense and how effective it is and how they shoot down everything. And they will deny everything they can get away with denying. And it reminds me of the United Arab Emirates. Let's just pull this clip up here. Because the UAE, when Iran struck near Dubai recently, they were claiming that they shot down all incoming munitions. And then suddenly there was a video that was released which exposed this. Here's the video. And this repeatedly happens, especially with the UAE, because the UAE is not quite as good at hiding things as the Israelis. The Israelis are better. And also the Israelis, with their population, they adhere to the censorship a little bit more than, tourists or modern day slave workers in Dubai or Abu Dhabi would. And of course there's harsh crackdowns there, but there's a lot of lying that's going on. And there's a lot at stake when it comes to the lying, because when you get embarrassed this badly and your air defense systems, which are supposed to be defending the skies of Israel and shooting down all of the incoming munitions, when they're getting hit directly and there's footage of it, it's a bad look. And it's a bad look because Israel tries to market its systems around the world. It tries to market its technology. And so when it's shown that this stuff doesn't work against FPV drones, which are a cheap alternative, and they are the cheat code against the Israeli military. Cheap drones, firing them at a distance and the Israelis have no idea what to do. And this is what happens when they come up against such challenges. And then you still have the likes of, here's Daniela Weiss. I'll play a clip of her that recently came out. The Israeli settlers talking about their intentions for southern Lebanon, and they believe that they are going to conquer South Lebanon. They've had entire conferences about this. They've come up with these AI-generated images of what South Lebanon will look like when it is colonized by these invaders, these fanatic invaders. And here they are speaking publicly still about doing this.
Gaza, we will settle Lebanon. We will settle the entire promised land. Thank you very much.
And see, the delusion is real here with these people, because there's no connection with the reality on the ground and her words. Now, even in Gaza, they claim they want to settle Gaza. They could not defeat any of the Palestinian factions in Gaza because they didn't fight them. And the Israeli military does not fight Hezbollah. It does not fight Hamas. It does not fight the PFLP or DFLP or Islamic Jihad. It fights the civilians. It fights the buildings. It doesn't fight the actual organizations. Now, it might carry out precision strikes, and it might go, well, maybe we have intelligence because we have some spies that someone important is in a building, and so we'll blow that whole building up and we'll kill that person. You know, they might be a military leader. They might be somebody with some connection to one of these groups, but that's not actually war. That's just intelligence operations. That's just fighting. That's using your technology. And nobody's doubting that Israel has the most advanced technology in the region. Nobody is doubting that the Israelis have the strongest air force. No one's doubting that. But that doesn't win you wars, and that's not a real strategy. And these drones can simply outdo you because they're not going after Hezbollah and actually fighting them and bringing the fight to them. And they didn't in Gaza either. And just as a clip here, pull this up. So this is a video at the start. Add this here. So this video was released. I don't think the audio is included, but this video was released by the Qassam brigades of Hamas when Hezbollah started retaliating against the Israeli, the 15,400 violations of the ceasefire agreement that it adhered to for 15 months when Hezbollah started retaliating against the Israelis. This is a video released by the armed wing of Hamas. I'll just play this here. This is Yoav Gallant, the former defense minister. And these are clips of the Palestinian factions blowing up Israeli tanks in the Gaza Strip. And that there, again, I think we don't have audio on this for some reason, but Sayyid Hassan Nasrallah, the former Secretary General of Hezbollah, he said in his speech, like, not to worry about your tanks if they bring them into southern Lebanon because you won't have any left. And that clip is played. So you saw some of those strikes from southern Lebanon on Israeli tanks there. And it's important to bring that up, I believe, because in the Gaza Strip, their tanks took a hit too. And they're a tank army. They just rely on staying inside of these vehicles. And again, they don't actually fight on the ground. Israel doesn't have a ground force, and it's a citizens' army. So for them, it's worse to lose soldiers than it is to lose civilians. They make more of a stink about it. And ideologically speaking, it has more of an impact if a large number of soldiers die than of non-combatants. Because if the soldiers are being killed in large numbers, it shakes the foundations of the Israeli myth. And the Israeli myth is this invincible army that protects the Jewish people and is the most moral. And that's why they say this stuff, because they have to delude themselves into believing the most moral army, the invincible army. It beats everyone. No one can touch it. All of their soldiers are invincible. They give ranks out, like participation trophies to their soldiers, because again, it's a citizens' army and they need them all to be enthusiastic about the army. And already that enthusiasm is dying off because they're struggling to convince their soldiers to continue to serve and go into Lebanon and go into Gaza. And earlier on during this conflict, the Israeli soldiers, their parents, were writing to the senior leadership. I know I've mentioned this on this stream a number of times. They were writing to the senior leadership, begging them to take their kids out. And you know what? After the threats of the FPV drones, they started withdrawing soldiers from southern Lebanon because it was too much of a danger. And then what did Hezbollah do? Hezbollah followed them back over the border with the FPV drones. And Israel believed that going after a senior leader in Hezbollah in Beirut, in the southern suburbs, was going to somehow have some sort of propaganda effect, I guess, like that this was somehow a victory for them. When what happened is that just meant that Hezbollah now would fire on Haifa and would escalate in terms of the amount of retaliatory operations it was committing every single day. And the Israelis, when they try and advance, this is what happens to them. This is a local Lebanese villager who captured a photo of what happened to Israeli tanks during their attempt to advance. And there's a 1, 2, 3 on fire. And I'll pull up Hezbollah's video of this operation. And they are releasing these videos very quickly. So they're getting their hands on these videos very, very quickly. And you'll see here how they confront this advance, this attempted advance. So again, this is what happens to the Israelis when they advance. They were using anti-tank guided missiles there. The Elmas system, which is reverse engineered version of the Israeli Spike anti-tank guided missiles. The Iranians reverse engineered them, gave them to Hezbollah, and they're able to very effectively use them. And so the Israelis, you can see the tanks burn, and there's videos and photos coming out. And there's quite a bit that has emerged in the past 24 hours in broad daylight. Locals were filming the Israeli tanks burning on hillsides, directly hit by Hezbollah munitions. And they're not able to do anything about this. And they're fighting an enemy in South Lebanon, which is militarily superior to who they were fighting in the Gaza Strip. The armed groups in the Gaza Strip were equipped with locally made weapons that weren't sophisticated, and they were at a disadvantage in terms of the terrain, their equipment, everything you could imagine. And Gaza was under what it was considered internationally to be an occupation. Israel surveyed every square inch of Gaza. And it's honestly astonishing that they couldn't even take out or locate the senior leadership of Hamas quicker. But they were fighting in the Gaza Strip armed groups that weren't as advanced as Hezbollah. And now they're fighting a real formidable force, and they're failing pretty badly. And this, I'm going to pull up this video here. This was, and everything you're seeing here, by the way, was released within the past, not even the past week. This is the past few days, most of what you're seeing here, these videos. And they're just, it's a constant stream of footage of the Israeli military, the convoys coming under attack, and them just being crushed. And by the way, you're watching this, the Israelis themselves are seeing this too. The Israeli soldiers are most likely seeing lots of these videos too. And there is a fear factor involved with that. And so the Israelis who desperately try to hide their casualties, to hide their losses, and to always present an image to their public that of victory and that they're doing so well, that's going very badly for them right now. Because again, these first-person view drones, we can see everything that they're doing. So I'm just going to play this clip here because this is quite interesting. So in this clip that you're seeing, this Besiege again, the Israelis actually locate the drone. They actually see this drone coming. You're going to see they open fire on it in a moment. So they actually do see the drone. There you see that explosion there. They actually tried to open fire towards it because they did see it coming. And this is a convoy of Israeli military vehicles. And the drone comes in and picks its target and strikes directly. And so the Israelis might not admit everything, but I mean, we're seeing it. Like we can't confirm, what number of Israeli soldiers were inside that armored personnel carrier. It could have been 8, in there. I don't know. And there's no way of confirming how many of them were injured versus killed. However, these strikes that are constantly happening, we're seeing, video after video come out every single day. They indicate something very clear, and there's a pattern. The Israelis are getting battered in southern Lebanon. And again, this is why I pulled up earlier the claims that were coming out from the Israelis, where the Israeli leadership was telling its people that they had won in Lebanon, that Hezbollah was no more, that they had defeated Hezbollah. This was in 2024. And their own people believed it. Not only did their own people believe it, the Israelis believed it, but much of the world believed it. Many people across the region believed it. I remember having these conversations over that 15-month period where I was saying, look, there's nothing to actually indicate that Hezbollah is done as a military force. And yet the propaganda was so powerful that many people believed this, and they were sort of deluded into believing that Hezbollah as a military group was done. It was over. And now we're seeing how well they are performing on the ground against the Israeli military. And this is not full throttle yet. So if the war is to return, let's say that the United States and the Israelis, along with now the UAE is openly involved, attack the Iran, and Iran starts firing ballistic missiles back on Tel Aviv and different sites throughout occupied Palestine, and Hezbollah decides to up the ante again, then this is going to be an utter catastrophe, because what has happened here is that Hezbollah they've been waiting for this moment. They dragged the Israelis into South Lebanon, right? And just for the sake of here, we'll pull up the map. That's Iran. Okay. So It's an easy way, if you can see here, to tell because they always speak about the Litani River. So the Litani River, it runs along here, right? So this is the Litani River. Israel basically claims to occupy this portion of territory down here all the way up. And there's part of it where they claim to occupy, further up and above the Litani even. And Israel just clearly does not actually own this territory. And the Israeli media today, what they were stating is, well, it's in fact Hezbollah that occupies the northern Galilee area because it sends its drones in at will. It constantly commits rocket attacks at Israeli soldier gatherings. It has accurate information here. And the Israelis are incapable of returning to places like Kiryat Shimona here, the settlement area, which more than half of the population here has fled since October 7. And they're not coming back. They won't come back. They don't have anywhere to come back to because they're too scared. They're too scared. I mean, you have these Lebanese villages here, and it's the exact opposite. Someone from Taibe or Khiyam, they'll come back to their bombed out house. And when there's an Israeli soldier, there's Israeli tanks. This quite literally happened in 2024. They'll come back to their bombed out houses and stand in front of Israeli tanks and wave a Lebanese flag. Whereas the Israelis, if there's sirens and some rockets that sometimes come and injure some settlers, or these are not large death tolls, like these rockets are not committing civilian massacres. That's not what's happening, right? The Hezbollah rockets are not doing that. If they're killing large groups of Israelis, they're targeting soldiers normally, right? But just the inconvenience of the rocket sirens and occasionally it hits a building, right? That in of itself is enough to drive the Israeli population out. For Lebanon, that's not the case. They're not about to leave. And like in the Gaza Strip, it's the same thing. You can destroy an entire area. Places like Jabalia refugee camp or Rafah, people can't really go back to Rafah, but in Khan Yunis and in Gaza City, Beit Hanun, anywhere. The people immediately, as soon as they can, they try and get back to their homes because, again, they're actually from this country. They're from that land and they want to go back to their home. The Israelis are not like that. They want to party on the beach. They want to drink. They're not like that. And again, because that is the fact, those are the facts, this circles again back to the whole spider's web theory, which Israel is obsessed with and they never let go because it's true. And the spider's web theory is not the theory that Israel itself militarily is necessarily weak. It's not about its technology and its missile capabilities and all of that and its intelligence capabilities and its ability to commit horrific crimes. We know that it can do that. But the whole theory was built around Israel has a citizens' army. They all are connected to the military, all of them. And if they haven't personally served in the military, which most of them have, they do go and serve in the military, then they're one step away from somebody that has. And so that military means everything to them. But again, it's a citizens' army, and that society is not one that is really hardened to war. And part of that is because of the fact that Israel has long had this military doctrine, and this dates back, and I've explained some of this before, but it's important to note, a military doctrine that originated with David Ben-Gurion of, well, we have better technology, we're more powerful, but let's fight short wars against our enemies. And if we fight these short wars, these very intense short wars, then we can win. And you'll see the 6-day war, even against Iran last year, the 12-day war. And these are the most successful war for Israel was the 6-day war, which they initiated with Operation Focus and then claimed that it was a preemptive strike. Like they claimed this time it was a preemptive strike against Iran. But, if Israel is still here, 20 years from now or 40 years from now, they'll be writing books about how they launched a preemptive strike and Iran was trying to, take them out with a nuclear weapon and all the rest of it, like they were claiming that Egypt was preparing an attack against them, which is just utterly ridiculous. And this has been thoroughly exposed if you look into the history. But again, they fight these short wars, these intense wars, not long wars. They cannot fight wars of attrition. So their society is not hardened to war of attrition, of suffering, of not having electricity, not having running water, having your homes destroyed, having your businesses, like you being under strain economically, you having to really struggle to live somewhere, right? And a lot of them, these Israelis who have foreign passports, will just leave because, hey, they have a foreign passport. Let's go to my house in Canada or in Australia or my house in South Africa or my home in whatever country, Britain, and they leave. Lots of them do this because, what's the point in them staying there? So again, with this spider's web theory, they fight short, intense wars. If you fast forward a little bit, because obviously after 1967, the Americans and the Israelis started, integrating more. The Americans really backed the Israelis in a very solid way, which has led us to the point where we're at now, where the Israelis have an enormous amount of influence over the Trump administration. The Trump administration is the Likud, the U.S. Likud administration, to be honest, at this point. Just no decision making of its own when it came to this war. It was just all whatever Israel told it. That aside, the Israelis were basically joined at the hip with the Americans, and the Americans eventually, they went into adopting a counterinsurgency approach to warfare, and they became risk adverse as well. The Americans themselves, they don't like to take risks for no reason. This war sort of goes against that, to be honest, because you're taking risks literally for no benefit. But the Iran war aside, they had this counterinsurgency approach. And so if you look back to the Second Intifada, the Israeli tactics that were used during the Second Intifada, just for reference, the First Intifada, a large-scale Palestinian, largely peaceful uprising against the Israelis, that started in 1987 and really ended with the Oslo Accords. 1993, the Declaration of Principles was signed. That sort of ended that. But then the Israelis did what the Israelis do and just violate agreements because, hey, agreements don't really mean anything to them. And so in the year 2000, there was the Second Intifada. And the Second Intifada was much more violent. But what Israel started doing is started to employ these new strategies of these targeted assassinations, right? And using special forces teams and raids and going after people this way. In the First Intifada, it was the Yitzhak Rabin's bone breaker policy. Go in and smash the bones of the children who were throwing stones at you. That was literally the policy, to break everyone's bones. So they can't come out the next day and throw a stone at your tank. Go and grab the kid and get a rock if you have to, or a rifle, and break their bones. That was the strategy. So it was very violent, very intense in that way. They shot at civilians. There's a lot of images, and I'm not going to go into the First Intifada. Then the Second Intifada, they started adopting these, targeted assassination approach very heavily. And from there, when the Second Intifada ends, which is, people dispute the exact time, but people put it at 2005. They did their operation in 2002 in the West Bank against the Palestinian resistance in Jenin, which was very brutal, by the way that they dealt with that. But they managed to defeat, to a large extent, the Palestinian resistance in the West Bank, the armed resistance I'm talking about here. But they failed in Gaza. In the Gaza Strip, they did a military operation in northern Gaza, and they failed to defeat the armed resistance. They managed to hide, get away, evade, clash. A lot of people were killed, but ultimately the Palestinian resistance, it survived in the Gaza Strip. But Israel was starting to use these strategies, right, and adapt in the way that it dealt with the Palestinians. But then came along Lebanon in the year 2000, the same year as the First Intifada. The Israelis had withdrawn from South Lebanon because it was just simply too costly, right? There's a lot that goes into that, which I won't get into. but they withdrew from South Lebanon. And then in 2006, they had to fight this war against Hezbollah, and they found that it's going to be too costly. It's going to have to be a long war. If they want to fight this war, they're going to have to fight a long war against Hezbollah in order to root them out. And that goes against the Israeli strategy. That's just not their doctrine. You don't fight long wars of attrition. You fight short wars, intense wars. So they ended the conflict with Lebanon, even though they did reach the Litani River. They symbolically reached it. They ended the conflict with Lebanon with what's known as the Dahiya doctrine. And the Dahiya doctrine is mass murder an enormous amount of civilians and destroy civilian infrastructure. And the purpose of this is very straightforward. You inflict such pain on that civilian population that it deters the resistance from attacking you again, from daring to challenge you again. That at least is the theory. So they committed the Dahiya doctrine, and then they shifted over after 2006 to the Gaza Strip. And at the time, in 2008-9, in their first large-scale massacre in the Gaza Strip, where they implemented the Dahiya doctrine, it was the perfect situation for them in Gaza, because in Gaza, Hamas was besieged, isolated. As soon as it won the legislative elections, in 2006, it was immediately sanctioned by the entire world. I'm not going to go into the elections too much, but and then Israel continued bombing, but that armed resistance, which I spoke about a moment ago, in Gaza was obviously still there, and it started developing, but it was not like Hezbollah. It wasn't as powerful as Hezbollah. And so Israel could manage it. That was the idea. We can manage this. But over the years, what happened is they went in mowing the lawn in Gaza again and again, committing these civilian massacres, implementing the Dahiya doctrine, and then, doing some targeted assassinations against members of Hamas and other groups. And they believed that they were mowing the lawn, but Hamas started getting a little bit stronger, despite the fact that it's under siege and its weapons are nowhere near the capabilities of Hezbollah. Meanwhile, Hezbollah had like 17 years of deterrence really against the Israelis. To the point, and I say deterrence, by the way, to the point that in 2022, the Secretary General of Hezbollah publicly threatened the Israelis that if the Israelis do not allow for the Lebanese government to attain a demarcation of their territorial waters to get access to their natural resources, their fields, the Pana fields, then Hezbollah will target all of the platforms, the Israeli platforms, and is willing to go to all-out war with the Israelis. And what happened? By the way, this was under the Yair Lapid, Bennett government. Netanyahu was briefly out of office at the time. And what happened is they ended up signing an agreement demarcating the maritime borders so that Lebanon could extract its oil and gas. Hezbollah had established the deterrence, not the other way around. Not the other way around. This bothered the Israelis, but they lived with it. And it was not a major thing, in Israeli politics, even influencing that much. Netanyahu at the time, he mouthed off at the opposition, and he told them that, look, they bowed down and they sacrificed our borders and all the rest of it. And then he came into office and did absolutely nothing about it. In fact, Hezbollah had, because the Israelis were trying to seize more Lebanese territory, they were going over the Lebanese border and clearing out territory there, clearing out the land on the other side, like destroying like the environment on the other side, and putting up this fence, which passed over the blue line territory in Lebanon, demarcating the de facto borders between the Israelis and Lebanon. And Hezbollah went into the Rajar village area, which is part of Lebanon under international law. It's on Lebanon's side of the border, it should be, but the Israelis illegally occupy it, and it put its fighters in tents on the other side. And when it did that, Netanyahu did nothing about it. Nothing. They couldn't confront them. And so that it was Hezbollah that had that deterrence, that won that deterrence. Nothing happened since 2006, but Israel still got its fix and still got to talk about its deterrence capacity, still got to test its weapons by attacking the Gaza Strip, whilst it continued to slowly take over the West Bank and expand its settlements, right? And ethnically cleanse the people. Now it's doing that in a more intense way in the West Bank. But in the Gaza Strip, it got to test its weapons. It had its Dahia doctrine. It did its targeted assassinations. And Gaza got to the point where it was totally unlivable. And by 2020, the UN experts had declared that Gaza was unlivable. And what had happened is, and a lot of people forget this, Hezbollah in 2006 did not have the rocket capabilities, by the way, to hit Tel Aviv. It didn't hit Tel Aviv. Hamas hit Tel Aviv first. So Hamas started developing these capabilities. And by the way, most of the rockets never did very much, right? They didn't have the best capabilities. Some of them started to get a little bit more sophisticated towards the end. In terms of like, I say the end, but I mean October 7, before the massive attack. And now their rocket arsenal, I presume they're rebuilding rockets right now because the Israelis are openly threatening to go back to war in Gaza, which means just to start full-scale genocide. They've killed about 800 people during the so-called ceasefire period and refused to implement any of their points that they agreed on. But what happened is the Israelis were stuck in Gaza. And this is why, and I'm not going to go too deep into this because people ask about Hamas, and there's this whole discourse online with people who constantly say, and these are genuine people, but they don't understand the history properly, and they say that Hamas is propped up by Netanyahu. There's truth to some points that they say, but ultimately they sort of get this wrong and they misinterpret things. But understanding this history, what happened is Hamas started getting a little bit too much. The Israelis didn't want to endure these constant rocket attacks. And even though they didn't do an enormous amount of damage, they were annoying to them nonetheless. And the situation in Gaza started to get to a boiling point. And so suddenly the Dahia doctrine was not working. What had happened is the people in Gaza had been subjected to all these horrors over the years, which made them sort of almost hardy and durable. And so come 2017, Hamas, there was a different scenario which occurred in the region. Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates started besieging Qatar, and they wanted to force Qatar to stop funding Hamas altogether, right? And temporarily, it made things difficult economically for Hamas. And this is oversimplifying it though, Hamas has its Al-Qassam brigades, which is its armed wing, and its Politburo. And there are different people which agree and disagree in both sides about different things. But what happened is in 2017, Iran again had a larger role to play in the Gaza Strip, but also Yahya Sinwar had taken over the organization and led Hamas inside of Gaza. He had great relations not only with Qassam to make those relations and to make agreements with the Qassam, but also with the other Palestinian factions. Even people in Fatah, he had lots of, which is the opposing faction for those that don't know, to Hamas in Palestine, right? So a more secular nationalist group instead of an Islamic one. And so when he came into power in Gaza, he posed a real problem to the Israelis. And the reason he did, not only were the military capabilities starting to develop, and the military capabilities were not something that Israel was necessarily thinking were an existential threat to them, but they were getting worried. And if you read the think tanks and what they were saying, they were getting somewhat worried about the trends. But Hamas issued a new charter, which was very explicit. In 2017, they tried to merge together with Fatah. They tried to come together with the Palestinian Authority and give the Palestinian Authority the ability to take over and run the civil administration in the Gaza Strip, Of course, the United States and the Israelis would not allow that to happen, but they wanted their rivals, traditionally their rivals in the West Bank, to take over Gaza. And they had even started, I believe they were deployed at the border. They were setting up, there was a whole announcement and celebrations from the people in Gaza because they believed that we're going to become like the West Bank. We might be open now. There's going to be a different predicament for us. This is a major development. Hamas did that. They tried to hand over the civil administration to Fatah, right, to the Palestinian Authority based in the West Bank, which has the sort of international recognition and represents the state of Palestine at the United Nations. That fell apart. What happened then is the Israelis put the Palestinian Authority under more strain economically, which is still going on today, by the way. And the Palestinian Authority pays a lot of the salaries in the Gaza Strip. And the salaries that were being paid in the Gaza Strip, they started to reduce them. So in 2018, Hamas went a step further. They went and they endorsed the Great March of Return, which was a mass non-violent movement against the Israelis, where hundreds of thousands of Palestinians went out, they danced, they did paintings, they had music, all sorts. And some of them came up to the separation fence and the wall and threw stones. And it was overwhelmingly nonviolent. The Israelis opened fire on them and mass murdered about 300 people in total across about a year and a bit. And throughout that whole time, by the way, Hamas stopped responding to Israeli bombardments. So Israel would bomb, Hamas would not fire rockets back during the Great Return March. It refused to do so. The Israelis had applied this pressure. The Palestinian Authority was not getting the funding. They were pressuring the Palestinian Authority. They wouldn't allow the Palestinian Authority to take over the Gaza Strip because the Israelis didn't want the Gaza Strip in the hands of a single Palestinian entity, especially if Hamas are there and they have their armed force. It's like a Palestinian army that exists, right? So they didn't want a two-state to come out of that, and they were so scared of that, so they stopped that from happening. So in order to calm things down in Gaza, they allowed funds to come in, which were sent from Qatar. And they allowed them again. After the whole thing calmed down with the besieging of Qatar by the other Gulf countries, what happened is then they allowed, the Israelis struck a deal with the Qatari to bring in money to supplement Hamas. Why? Not to supplement its armed forces, to supplement Hamas, which was the civil administration. It ran the police forces. It ran, of course, there's the civil society sector. All of this, everything that was going on in Gaza, there were a government there, okay? And their people needed salaries as well. This is another thing, just average people working in, they had a health ministry, for instance, okay? Normal things like a government. People, unfortunately, don't understand this. I understand this is a tangent now, but while I'm on this point, I wanted to elaborate on this. The money started going into Gaza this way. And it's better than going to an armed conflict with Gaza because the Israelis would rather do targeted assassinations, which they started doing. They ran a botched raid late in 2018. It failed, actually. They tried to capture a commander of Hamas. It failed on the ground. And they would launch these strikes and attempt to try and degrade the capabilities. And occasionally they try and go after leading figures. They did some assassination campaigns against Palestinian Islamic Jihad, which is the second largest group in the Gaza Strip, still is today. And they wouldn't, they started doing other things as well. They let Palestinian workers, more of them, come across the Erez crossing to go and work in farms, for instance, because the unemployment rate was one of the highest in the world in Gaza. Now, of course, what they've done, it's even worse. And they were in this predicament where things were heating up in the West Bank. Things got pretty tense in occupied Jerusalem as well in 2021. Things were really getting intense. The armed resistance started returning to the West Bank. But none of this was an existential threat in the eyes of the Israelis. And they were not sort of thinking about, oh, well, we've got to do this big war against Gaza to uproot Hamas and stuff like that. So they put it on the back burner. They allowed these funds to come in, which were not that much. They weren't, if you look at the funds, they weren't enough to go and fund a whole military industry and keep it alive. And it wasn't the difference between tunnels or no tunnels. And it came in for few years. And it wasn't just Netanyahu that was funding them as well. The government in between allowed this money to come through. So it's not just Netanyahu funded them. They had a plan to divide the West Bank from Gaza. And they tried to do that. But they weren't funding Hamas like as if they're propping, because this argument of funding Hamas means that Hamas was about to fall apart without Israel's support, or that without Israel's support, it wouldn't have weapons and wouldn't be able to carry out October 7 and all of the rest of this, which is nonsense, because Hamas has absolutely nothing, basically no funding now, no backing, no supply routes. Rafah is not open, and yet Hamas is still there. Hamas is still building its military force up again during the ceasefire because Israel is violating it every day and killing them. And just going after civilians has killed about 800 people. So the idea that Netanyahu sort of controlled Hamas and controlled them by the purse strings, the amount that was coming in from Qatar was not enough to properly prop up Hamas. This is just not true. And there were economic constraints that the Israelis were putting on in different sides. And they were besieging Gaza. And it becomes a contentious issue because people have their theories, and people who are not familiar with Palestinian politics as intimately, unfortunately, they grab onto some information. By the way, if anyone wants to know more about this, I did do a 3-part video series here for Mint Press. Also, if you put your comments below, maybe I'll address this on another live stream again. There's a few more things that I wanted to get into here, but I thought that, although that's a little bit of a tangent, it does help to explain where things went and where things went wrong with the Israelis. Because when they adapted this, having said all of this that I've just said, when they adapted the targeted assassinations and the Dahiya doctrine, and they were focusing on Gaza and they forgot about Lebanon, what happens is their society got even worse in terms of dealing with wars of attrition. And so going into Gaza, they just committed a genocide. That was their tactic. The tactic was genocide. We'll defeat them through genocide. The ultimate Dahiya doctrine. The ultimate Dahiya doctrine. And we'll put alongside that targeted assassinations. That's what we'll do here and there. But genocide is the policy, and it also teaches the rest of the Arabs, it restores the deterrence capacity, and it teaches the rest of the Arabs that we're not to be messed with, we're so strong, and is again the idea of the Dahiya doctrine, genocide doctrine instead now, that they've implemented in the Gaza Strip. And so they're stuck. They have no way to deal with this except mass murder of a civilian population, to try and create a civil war desperately inside of Lebanon using their puppet regime that's in power now. And we're seeing the result on the ground every single day. And the Israelis now, just to show you a few more here, here's another clip of what Hezbollah has been doing. Like the drones, they have these drone control systems. Hezbollah is targeting drone control systems on the ground that the Israelis have set up with accuracy with their own FPV drones, which shows, again, the Israelis and their inability to deal with the threats. And again, this is low-intensity warfare now. If this heats up and Hezbollah goes all out, it's going to be a lot more difficult for the Israelis on the ground. They're going to suffer a lot more. Now, the censorship will kick in a lot more again. They will censor a lot more. However, they can't get around the fact that this is all filmed. You see here, they can target directly Israeli equipment, this drone control system here. They know exactly where it is, and they target it right there inside of the top of a building accurately. And they know exactly what they're going after. So these drone operators are getting more talented, and they're picking their targets very precisely. Another thing they've been doing with the FPV drones here is See, they are dropping anti-personnel munitions on Israeli soldier gatherings. This is something we did see actually in the Gaza Strip at the very start of the war, when Hamas did have some drones of its own. But it caused a crisis back then as well, because they were talking about how the Israeli soldiers had to look up constantly and monitor for these drones. But here they are dropping these munitions from a drone and impacting at least next to Israeli soldiers. And this it's a real problem for them again, because everywhere they go, they're faced with drones that are either dropping these anti-personnel munitions, or they are directly impacting their tanks, their armored personnel carriers. They're taking out their equipment, their command vehicles, as we've seen. All of this footage as well, all of this footage is just in the days behind us here. It's in the past week. This is not, there's a lot more that has been published throughout the war. Here's another example here of a multi-pronged attack. So they're using drones, artillery, and rockets here to target Israeli soldier gatherings.
كل شيء عندنا بعده جديد بالعلبة، كله جديد. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. ما يتقبلوا ما يتقبلوا الله رمى يا صاحب الزمان.
So that being said, that's not all of the videos that have been released since our last stream, but that's the ones that I've selected here to just show a variety of different clips that have been released. And again, these can't be denied by the Israeli military. They can't censor this because there are videos documenting all of this, and it's coming out constantly, especially with the FPV drone attacks. And so these Israeli soldiers have set up in position in southern Lebanon, trying to do what they were doing in Gaza, just destroying civilian infrastructure, and then they're getting constant attacks and ambushes. And they don't have any answers. They have no answers. And that has led them to withdrawing some of their forces, which will again get attacked over the border. And then they lash out and they attack Beirut, and they're still not capable of inflicting anything that comes close to a defeat on Hezbollah. Because again, the strategy is based around the idea, well, if we just kill a lot of civilians and put some pressure on, then this is going to somehow win. And look how that went for them in the Gaza Strip. It didn't go too well for them because they never got a victory out of it. All they did is inflict massive pain and suffering on the civilian population. Militarily, they didn't achieve anything. They haven't won on any front. They haven't won against Lebanon. They haven't won against Gaza. They haven't won against, obviously, Iraq, but that was, a lesser front. They haven't won against Yemen, but really they didn't manage to pull off much at all against Yemen. They haven't won against Iran. And they've had about 3 years now almost fighting this 7-front war and they aren't any closer to victory. In fact, the entire world is appalled at their behavior, and they've turned everyone on them. And now they may have scared some in the region into submission, but the vast majority of the population of the planet opposes them, and they do now have a problem with even securing support in Western countries, because even that is fading away because of how poorly they behaved and what we've all witnessed, a live stream genocide. So now they're stuck. And in Lebanon, those tanks are like coffins on wheels, and they may think they're having fun blowing up houses, but now they've got the anxiety of at any moment one of those FPV drones could come in and hit their position, and it's not going to be so fun. There'll be no more sniffing of women's underwears and posting that on social media, because you might not be able to smell after getting hit with one of those drones. And they live with this every day, knowing that they could be ambushed, knowing that they could be hit, knowing that death from the sky is coming in from above. And so now this is real war that they're actually having to deal with. This is not just picking off civilians in Gaza and occasionally being confronted by someone with an RPG. This is serious. And this is a war that they don't have any answers for. And they've created this of their own doing because of what they did in Lebanon. If they didn't do those indiscriminate pager attacks, if they didn't kill thousands upon thousands of Lebanese civilians, attack mosques and churches and insult the Lebanese people in the way they have, then this wouldn't be the case. But again, all of these groups which are fighting Israel only exist literally because Israel oppressed their people. They are groups that come from indigenous populations. Whether you agree with their politics, how they came to power, anything, all of that stuff is aside, and it's irrelevant to the point. They are there because they came from the indigenous populations in the region, and they decided to pick up arms and try and defend their people. That's why they're there. And of course, the Israelis are settler colonialists who their priority is laying on a beach with a cocktail. They're not the same people. They're people there who were there to steal land and who believe in ethno-supremacy and base an entire regime on ethno-supremacy. Whereas these people, they have their resistance movements. And that's why, you've got all flavors of resistance movements in the region. You got Shia resistance movements. You got Sunni Islamic resistance movements. You have communist and socialist resistance groups. You have nationalist groups. You have groups which are created and run by Christians and those who are created and run by Muslims, right? Everything in between that has existed. Because ultimately those people who are living in that land are going to resist. They're not going to run away. They don't have anywhere else to go. And they've been there for thousands of years. So they're going to continue to resist. We're going to continue to see these videos come out. And of course, the corporate media is going to continue to lie to you. So we're going to show you those videos because, again, that's what's actually happening on the ground. And we want to cover what is actually going on and try and deliver some context for everyone out there, because in the Western media, we just don't get that. We don't get that. But we have alternative media here. So if you enjoyed this live stream, everyone, for today, we're going to wrap this up. Please hit the like button if you got this far and you did like the content. Drop a comment. Let us know what you think about this content. And we will be back at the same time next week. We're doing these streams every single week, so make sure to stay tuned. And again, please share this video and hit that like button before concluding watching this video. And it has been a pleasure. So thank you to everyone. Please do support Mint Press and our work to keep this alive. And we'll continue to be here updating you on the latest that is happening on the target stream for Mint Press News.